You're listening to the Plate Podcast.
I'm here with Anushka Neo. She's the incredible mind behind 31 Farms. Anushka did her degree in economics and management, and her career has taken her from marketing, baby spas, all the way back to a family farm. She's a 7th-generation farmer who now grows more than 30 varieties of specialty grains. Anushka is a wheat nerd and agri-entrepreneur who's turned her passion into a thriving venture by growing specialty grains like black wheat, emmer wheat, and many other heirloom varieties that is now a favorite among the top chefs and bakers in India. We're going to chat about her journey, challenges, and wins along the way, and why she's so passionate about keeping the Indian wheat varieties alive. Welcome, Anushka.
Thank you so much for having me, Sanjana.
I think to start with, your career has taken like quite a few interesting turns, all the way from like marketing, baby spas, and going back to your family farm.
Yeah.
So tell me, like, what really inspired you to go back to farming?
Well, going back to the farm was never a part of the plan. It happened all because of the pandemic. And it really started. So I studied economics and business management in Delhi while I was still a student. During second year, everyone was just sort of planning what to do next, what to do next. And this was the period in 2019 where I was constantly thinking what to do next, what to do next, something which is of my own and not like really working for someone with having no clarity of where it's sort of leading in long term. Lots of those ideas around that point in time in retrospect turned out to be very agri and food oriented, right from trying to do urban bee farms to doing an avocado based cafe to how to reuse or convert the leftover cotton wood stalks into pellets for biofuels. So they were like across the spectrum. But during that point in time, my father also always encouraged me that, while you're living in Delhi, why don't you go and check out what's happening? All agriculture related trade fairs used to happen in Pragati Madan. And during that point in time on internet, I found out about the black wheat. That led me to ask him, do you know about this particular variety? Do you know of this wheat? What wheats are you growing? So that was sort of the beginning of me trying to inquire a little bit about the wheat sort of landscape in India, but with no plans of going back to the farm. I was living in Delhi trying to helicopter this whole situation and trying to be a farmer while being on the farthest end of it. So there was no plan to go back until the pandemic came.
But like, I guess you said that your interest came from like black wheat.
Yeah.
And did you then tell your dad to like grow it?
Yeah.
And farming is a profession that's so big on experience.
Right.
So did he like sort of resist your new ideas of trying to grow something next cool thing?
Well, honestly, no, because thankfully we have sort of a large land holding, about 100 acres. So every year, 2 to 5 acres are anyway kept for experimenting on the new stuff that's come out. And that point in time, I was like that. I found out about this black wheat, and all I had read that it's rich in antioxidants, good for people who are suffering from diabetes or cardiovascular issues, or like have a very sedentary lifestyle. So it's really going to help. And at the same time, economically speaking, it's going to improve the economics of the farm because it's going to be sold at a much higher rate. So those were the sort of two key motivations that it felt like the future of wheat. So I got him seeds for 2 acres and he grew it that season. But little did I know that the black wheat or any wheat which is not grown mainstream commercially doesn't sell in the mandi, right? So when we went back during the pandemic, he harvested the 2 acres, but the black wheat was just lying there. I was like, why haven't you sold it? I read in the newspaper this, or the scientists also told me that this is the price you can expect for it. And he was like, can't sell it in the mandi and no, there's no buyer for it. And that is what essentially led me to sort of take it upon myself out of partially guilt, partially responsibility that, I made this happen now. I have to sort of see it through. So that was the beginning of 31 Farms also in a lot of ways.
Why did you guys call it 31 Farms?
Well, we're 3 sisters and a brother. And we named our farms 31 Farms probably 6-7 years before I even moved back, soon after our brother was born, just a couple years after that, everyone wants to think of a farm name. And we were like, okay, we can't have it as a random name. It has to have something. And that point in time, like from a surface level, it sounds very cute, three sisters and a brother. But the underlying narrative is very anti-patriarchal in nature, because everywhere you see across the Indian agricultural landscape, or like in many societies, till you don't have a son, it's almost like you don't have an heir, you don't have a legacy. So you would continuously see this narrative that two sisters and a brother, three sisters and a brother, four sisters and a brother. And in our village, there are even six sisters and a brother. So it could have been
A long way.
2-1 or 3-1 or 5-1, but for us it ended up being 3-1. So that's really the underlying narrative that 3-1 has.
You started growing black wheat, and how come you decided to grow black wheat without sort of understanding if there is a market for it? And also now I know that you work with a lot of top chefs and bakers. So how did you then create a market for something that already there's no need for black wheats? How did you go about creating a market for it?
To be honest, in the beginning, it was excitement. That 2 acres was purely blind faith. It's like, and also because there was a lot of marketing by the university itself around it, that, it's almost going to change your life. And, black wheat might be new to India, but it's not new to the world. In fact, a lot of old heritage varieties across the world were multiple colored. Wheat wasn't always just this amber colored green. There is red wheat, white wheat, amber wheat, blue wheat, purple wheat, and black wheat. Those are the 6 colors that exist in the entire grain spectrum as well. They exist for barley, they exist for wheat, they exist for corn, all sorts of colors, right? So in the beginning, it was a lot of excitement. But once, obviously, when I moved back, I saw the black wheat was just there and wasn't sold in Mandi. I took it upon myself. It was as simple as creating an Instagram handle, pure cold messaging any bread maker that I could see, or a cookie maker, like any baker I saw on the internet. I just cold messaged them. Hi, I am this farmer from Punjab. I have this black wheat, and this is the research paper on black wheat which suggests that this is how it's good for you. I'm happy to send you a sample. And many people, of course, and little did I know that we were in middle of the sourdough wave as well, and so many people were baking at home. So one thing led to the other. So all the content that we created was user generated, because I knew nothing about baking. So all we were doing were making very Indian traditional things at home, like probably chapati, puri, parantha, or like just the fried matris and stuff. And that's what we were putting out, including maybe the extent of my baking was making pancakes. So that is what I was putting out, but a lot of bakers were experimenting and sharing that content with us. That one chain led to the other and led other people to believe that, okay, we would also like to experiment. And soon there were pasta makers making black wheat pasta. But there was the downside as well, because from my miller's perspective, he was like, whenever you send me black wheat to mill, please send me an amber color normal wheat as well. Because most of the villagers are thinking I'm giving them bad wheat that's damaged and decayed because the flour is gray in color. So I need to clean up my mill with the normal wheat, and I'll give you that flour as well. So that was the challenge from the milling side. And because most people hadn't seen black wheat, they felt, or rather thought, that we were adding charcoal to normal wheat flour, and that is what we were selling to them, because charcoal breads were also quite a hype at that point in time. And that is how, like, one thing led to the other. Our major break, so to speak, came when 8 to 9 months down the line, Daniel Trilson at Bread and Chocolate and Subco found out about us on internet, and he's inquired for a bunch of samples. And as soon as Subco started using flour from 3-1 Farms, suddenly all eyes were on us, that, oh, what is this farm selling? What flour from where? Middle of, like, where has it sprung from? That is what really helped us. But I'd say, looking for the last 5 years, it's really been the community. We've never marketed ourselves, always been word of mouth. Someone likes it, they recommend it to the other people. But
Yeah.
people generally still haven't developed the taste, because
But how does it vary?
Usually, yeah. So absolutely. So people who eat normal chapatis, the Indian chapatis have a very distinct sweet taste. That's why sharbati is so popular, right? That underlying sweet taste, very soft chapati, the baked aroma, a little buttery. So that's the flavor profile that the Indians like for their chapatis. However, black wheat, it's very nutty in taste and it's almost like a savory wheat. I don't know if you understand what I mean, but you would ideally want to pair black wheat with like mushroom and cheese, where
Like a bread, a sourdough would go really well with black.
exactly. But even in chapati, right, it's not that sweet taste. It's very nutty. It's almost like savory cracker. That's the taste that would come through, and that's only and only because of the antioxidant compounds. Even the amber colored wheat has certain antioxidants. The black wheat has something called anthocyanins, which give it the black color. So each of these colors are antioxidant compounds, and that is essentially what we are looking at. So terroir really is a thing for wheat, which most people do not understand. They only, I would say, restrain terroir to fancy things like coffee, cacao, or wine, or cheese, or whatever. But for wheat, it is as much applicable. We tried to grow Himalayan rye in plains, and it was bland and grassy. But when you get Himalayan rye from actually Spiti and Lahaul, it's so fruity, so floral, so sweet. You open the bag and the aroma is just something different. So same goes for sharbati, you know. The modern sharbati, honestly, the demand is much higher than the supply, and there's a lot of mixing that happens at the origin. The sharbati that most people are selling is not real sharbati. Probably 1/5 of a component is sharbati, and the rest 80% is any other commodity wheat being mixed to it. So people are eating all sorts of wheat in name of sharbati, but sharbati, because it grows in a specific place, the why it got famous is essentially there's a place in MP called Sihor, and the soil in Sihor is such that it lends that flavor. The agroclimate is such that the water, the soil, the sun, everything lends to a certain flavor profile in that wheat, and that led it to being that famous. In India, it takes almost 10 years for scientists to release one wheat variety. So it grows to like first the crosses. The scientists have to select probably from whatever 10, 20,000 varieties that they have on what wheats to select to make crosses of. After the crosses are made, you do some observation over a couple or 2, 3 years on what different varieties are coming out. Once you see that you're getting the traits that you desire, you will select those particular varieties, and it's very manual work. So all the GMO shit goes out a window. It's very labor and field oriented and year on year, because you can only grow it once a year. But mostly, more often than not, it's very agroclimate based. So some wheats will do well in UP. They are specific to UP. Something that's grown in peninsular region will just do well in peninsular region. So that's how like the topic of terroir, so to speak, is not just restrained to things like coffee and cacao and cheese and wine and so on and so forth.
Anushka, you grow a variety of high protein wheat that is HD3226.
Yeah.
And that's got like it's a favorite among the chefs and the bakers.
Right.
So if you could tell me a little bit more what this variety is and why the bakers specifically prefer that.
What most farmers, specifically in Punjab, do is because every year universities release new varieties of wheat. Now, all of these wheats, or rather the aim of breeding in scientific institutions, is twofold. One is to maximize the yield. Second is to have a wheat resistant to climate change, or basically all the biotic and abiotic stresses. These two sort of take the top priority. Then comes the nutrient, then comes the flavor profile. But because of how our system is set up, including MSP and all the entire macroscopic system, scientists are trying to optimize for the first two parameters. So there are new wheat varieties which say would give you 2.5 tons or 25 quintals an acre worth of yield every year. So the farmer would be incentivized to buy that seed so that he can get a higher yield, because his income is directly proportional to how much he is able to produce. Not the quality, just the quantity, because it will be sold at MSP. So he cannot grow a variety that just produces half of it and like get no price, because there's no buyer for it, and the mandi, he would really not benefit from it. Now, scientifically speaking, the yield and the protein content have an inverse ratio, right? Higher the yield, lower the protein content, because protein is essentially solidified form of nitrogen and a lot of other things, right? Amino acids, so nitrogen. Now, what we try to optimize for is grow a wheat variety, which you name 3226 or 3086, and there are a few others, that we would pick a variety that has an optimal yield between 18 quintals to 20 quintals per acre. So we have that balance, and we are able to achieve a protein percentage above 12. Now, it's not only the quantity of protein, it's also the quality of the protein, which is where gluten comes into picture. So it's not just the quantity of gluten, it's the quality of the gluten also that matters. When you talk about quality of gluten, for bread, you need lots of strength because you want the dough to go through long fermentation, you want it to hold good enough water, and so that it gives you a good enough rise as well. So what we would try to do is essentially all the wheat varieties that we would pick specifically for bread making should have a GLU-1 score of 10. That is essentially a determinant of gluten quality. So this wheat essentially is an 18-month long cycle. 6 months of growing and then 12 months of maintaining that quality to supply same throughout the year. So that's how we are able to distinguish sort of ourselves in the market, because there is no other farm specializing in wheat across the country. And at the same time, people who are selling flour, what they do is, where I said gluten or protein is a complex issue, right? What they would essentially do is to make up for the lack of protein or like lack of high quality of protein, they would just add vital wheat gluten. So now comes the question of why are people going gluten sensitive? Because you're adding too much of it. There is only so much that your body can digest. Too much of anything is bad for you. It is as simple as that. And today, if you see, there is vital wheat gluten in anything from Bonvita to ice cream to all of your malt-based shakes to your protein shakes. It's being sold like all the bars, like, protein bars which are sold in name of high protein this, high protein that. Where is that coming from?
So that's more gluten.
That's more gluten. It could be different sources of protein, but you always should look, because you would always find vital gluten there. Always. So that's what people would do. They would take any generic wheat flour grown God knows where, treated like God knows how, and they would just add vital gluten to make up for the strength that they're looking for.
So what's the difference between baking with the HD version of it and like the normal white
White
wheat
flour. So honestly, it's two things. One is like the quality of your final product is directly dependent upon the quality of the input. The quality of the output is dependent upon the quality of the input. Now, if you're using a wheat that was grown responsibly using all good practices and it's naturally high in good quality protein, you will just need flour, water, and salt. However, if you're using any generic white flour, first, the white flour has nothing to give. It just bare minimum protein and starch. There is no nutrient. When you think of sourdough, you naturally think of something that's nourishing, that's high in all the micronutrients, good for your gut health, and really fills you up. You don't look at it as that you're eating air. That's not essentially sourdough. The white flour sourdough has nothing to give except the face of itself. So that white flour sourdough, because it's low in protein content, it is supplemented with vital wheat gluten. Now your body cannot digest that much gluten. It's really hard to break it. That's why you go through long and slow fermentation process, because it has all its benefits. So that's really one of the difference. Secondly, it is not to say that only this wheat is good for sourdough baking. That's not true at all. You can make good bread with any wheat. Any whole grain flour would give you a good bread. Full stop. It's as simple as that. Beyond that, it depends on a baker's personal preference.
What's the price difference for like the normal wheat flour that these bakers are buying and this high protein HD variety?
Well, almost double. But at the same time, what most bakers would buy, and I'm speaking in very generic, macro, mass premium terms, that you would get maida, which is white flour from any roller mill or anywhere, between, I would say, around $40 a kg, plus the transportation and so on and so forth. However, if you go into the artisanal market, you can source really high quality flour starting 70 to 80 bucks a kg and can go up to 150 a kg depending upon what you're aiming at. Yeah.
But do we have a market for that though? Like, I mean, this is like premium artisanal
Yeah.
bread.
Yeah.
And then once the value is added to that flour, do we really have a market for people
So here's the
actively
question.
investing into it?
The 40 rupee a kg flour is used by Bon, Kitty, Cremica, and the Wonder Breads of the world as well. And that loaf of bread is sold for 50 to 60 rupee a kg. Now, a sourdough loaf is sold anywhere between 200 to 350 bucks a loaf, depending upon who you are, what's the size of the loaf, and so on and so forth. So if you are just using flour, water, and salt, the only cost is the flour. And if that is what you're using, same as Bon, Kitty, Cremica for the mass produced bread, and still charging that 200 or 250 rupee a kg premium, then it doesn't matter. You might as well not make a sourdough. Yes, it is viable. Yes, it is affordable because you're also operating in a category targeting a certain clientele or like a target audience that is ready to pay for good food. Because it's very easy to find bad food right now, but it's very, very hard to find good food.
I think as you've already mentioned that you work with so many artisanal premium bakers and chefs. So how did you, I feel like there's like, you've invested quite a lot of time and energy into branding and social media strategy. So how did you go about it in the beginning?
In the beginning, I went on to Canva and just wrote something called 31 Farms, and that was our logo for quite a while essentially. You will not believe, but in the last almost 5 years, we've changed our packaging 6 times. Logo identity has essentially changed once because the first one was made by me. That stayed for a while. And the packaging was something that we were just not able to figure out from the get go. So initially, we used to pack our flour with handwritten notes on what flour it is and just the transparent bags, 20 kg, 5 kg, whatever you needed. And that was our packaging for the first 6 to 10 months essentially. And once we sort of started figuring things out, because we were also and still operating out of a remote farm in Punjab, right? And the nearest town is 18 kilometers away, and you only have option of a few logistic companies, and anything you ship is going to reach the customer 6 to 10 days later anywhere in the country, right? So you have to like really go through all of the logistics companies to like see. So for the first year and a half, it was really a test and trial of our patience because we would send certain material and it would break on the way. And flour once opened up, once spoiled, there's no point getting it back. So we sort of went through our fair share of a learning curve and eventually sort of stumbled upon the right partners for the right packaging material, the right branding. I worked with a friend of mine from college who's been my graphic designer for every single startup I have dabbled with. And we went on to sort of build our brand together. And since then, it's been very organic, honestly. We don't have an in house social media team. I take care of our social media. And the content that you see, so much of it is still user generated. And the rest of it is very farm oriented, whatever happens at the farm, and an accumulation or rather a very simplified version of everything that I read. Over the last 5 years, I've read probably over 400 research papers. So all of them need to be distilled down in very simple language. Not everyone wants to know the genetics of wheat, but they would be very interested if I could tell them few interesting things about their flour or how it's affecting their body or what could they do with it or what other bakers across the world are doing with it. So that is really our social media in like a small packet. Yeah.
But when I think you said that in the beginning there was no such strategy or it's just you designing the logos. So when Chef Daniel from Subco approached you, so was it just now like you said it's because of the merits of the flour itself and it's the best flour he's ever used. So is it then the word of mouth that's really working for you and people who really care about the science and the quality of the flour?
Right. So The time that Daniel sort of found us on internet was a time when the whole transparent packaging, handwritten notes was where we were at. We were really trying to figure it out what this is. I was so new to the to the world of wheat itself that I knew almost next to nothing. But at that point in time, when Daniel said that it's probably one of the best bread flours that he's seen in this country, that led me to thinking that what is it that I am doing right and what is it that there's actually wrong in the wheat flour supply chain, because someone like Daniel has probably used every wheat flour that there is, right? He has access to everything. That led to like a whole array of questions, right? What eventually all of it led down to is a very supply chain oriented issue. Now the current wheat supply chain looks like all the farmers in any region would grow different wheat varieties. All of it is sold in mandi, right? So you have soft wheats, medium protein wheats, and hard wheats, all sold at the same price in the same mandi and all mixed up. Now, when the traders buy it or when the FCI buys it, all of it gets mixed up. Now, this wheat would be sold to big roller mills who would essentially make the refined flour, or to anyone else who's interested in buying rather. No roller mill will be milling two batches which are just the same. So every time they would get a different lot. Imagine milling 200 tons of wheat every day and never getting the same lot of wheat. What that essentially means is that if your input is different every time, your output will be different every time. Now, to control for that, most mills would either add whiter wheat gluten, ascorbic acid, enzymes, and so on and so forth to maintain a certain rheology of their flour. So, certain parameters like how much water it will absorb, what is the protein content, what's the ash content, and so on and so forth. You would sort of add things to it. Now, what we do is because we are growing a certain wheat variety in a certain region, we know that it's grown literally right under our noses for the 6 months. We've chosen the right variety, given it all the right things, harvested it the right manner, and it's the same grain that we're milling across the year. That's how we are able to maintain quality. And that's how no one else is able to maintain quality, because they're essentially sourcing the wheat from multiple regions and multiple farms of traders or wherever. So they don't even know the source. That's how we are different. And I think everyone wants to sort of be a part of this journey and support as well.
And apart from wheat, what all other specialty grains are you growing?
So currently, honestly, our portfolio for other grains is smaller, but with barley, we do three kinds of barley. One is amber naked barley. So mostly the barley you would have seen is comes with husk. So they polish it and they call it pearled barley, but you've taken all the bran, which is the fiber of it. So we're working on a variety that is huskless. So it's free threshing like the normal grain. You will get the whole barley grain with the fiber slash the bran intact. Then we're working on a black barley. So that's very interesting. The origin of it is in Tibet. So that's a variety that was given to us by Triple O Farms. They were saving the seeds. We took the seeds from them and we multiplied it. The third variety we're working on is for the brewing industry. So it's a variety of malting barley that essentially every brewer would use to create a malt and then use it in their craft beer. So that's our barley portfolio right now, still very small. In terms of rye, we're only working on one variety that comes from Spiti Lahore, and it's the landrace that's been grown there for over 2 centuries, as the story goes. For the fourth grain, which is corn, we've worked on it for over 3 years now, and we established the entire supply chain while working with Chef Alex of Americano. He's part Puerto Rican. So we really wanted to open a Latin American restaurant in Bombay. So Yarrow Farms is completely organic. So we've chosen them as our partner long term to multiply the seeds and grow a lot of these white, green, purple, black, red varieties of corn as well, which will be out in less than a year. So yeah.
Anushka, farming is still in India, especially, I think, a very much male-led sectors, including, like, I think for you, middlemen and mandis that you work with. So how did you, and you're fairly young, so how did you create a space for yourself to be taken seriously among like people who are probably a lot more experienced? And so how did that go about?
Honestly, in the beginning, It was the sheer support of my family because I mentioned we have our own family farms. So I didn't have to, for the first 2 years, look out of the farm. I was just working with my father, and a lot of it was very experimental in nature. Things got quite tricky because at the first 2 years, I was essentially working with my father, our family miller, who's been our miller for 40 years, and the women from the village who would sift and pack the flour with me, and the chefs and the bakers in the city. So there, it was like rather very sort of contained and very small network of people engaged in it. But after the first 2 years, as we started working with more farmers and farmers from across the country, because as I mentioned earlier, different wheats are differently or well suited to different agroclimate regions. So you can't really grow one in the other. You have to grow where it grows the best, essentially. That is where, honestly, like, we have never dealt with middlemen because there has never been a need to. What I have done repeatedly, though, is show up. So when you're persistent enough and show up at a farmer's door, house, or you call them often enough and you build that relationship over the years, the trust builds and the relationship builds. When I went to the universities, I was shocked how welcomed I was because it was a refreshing change, right? And luckily at Punjab Agri Universities, most of the scientists themselves who are wheat breeders are women. So for them to see that, oh, like, there is a young female farmer trying to dabble with grain, which is itself a very complex, subject matter in terms of right from the genetics to growing to the entire supply chain. They were very, very encouraging.
It was like mostly result oriented.
Yes.
Hence, it was like a bit of a success. And I started seeing other people taking it seriously.
Absolutely, absolutely. Otherwise, like, in a very simple local language, Anushka aata bana rahi hai, aate ka kaam karti hai. This is how you would generally explain it to anyone when you talk to your relatives or the neighbors or whoever. But yeah, seeing people from outside come and pay attention to this wheat that generally the farmers would not pay to, I think made them more curious and made wheat more intriguing to them. And since then, it's now there's a narrative around it.
But you've been like very experimental with your approach to farming and what you want to grow. And I don't know if your family was like also experimental, or were they a bit more traditional?
Well, my grandfather was a very experimental farmer. He would travel across the country, get all sorts of vegetables, fruits, grains, and he would on all sorts of crops, and he would grow at our farm. My father, after him, is more commercially oriented, so he is more into traditional farming. And then when I joined 5 years ago, for them it was a refreshing change because they always compared me, or rather in their head put me or associated me to my grandfather. Oh, she's just gone on her grandfather, she's gone on her grandfather. So there wasn't a resistance at all, but at the same time, our farm before I joined was, yes, very commercial and traditional agriculture. And now the experiments, for me, it's very scientific. It's funny that I call it scientific, but the way I've organized the wheat or all these grains in my head is just by reading the species and the subspecies and how they're scientifically different from each other, and how each one of them has a place in our, I would say, on our plate and in our food system, and how only when we are growing diverse crops within same crop type or different crops type is only when we can fight climate change. So the larger goal essentially here is to also fulfill this climate resiliency goal for us, that okay, and is to build a profitable model of a farm. Like when I initially learned about economics of agriculture, I was shocked. Why would you even do anything? And then it all started making sense. Why, our generation doesn't want to get into agriculture, why so much of the youth from Punjab has moved out, why our villages are empty, why we don't have the next generation of farmers. The average age of a farmer in Punjab today is 55.
Do you think that would change, like especially seeing you in Punjab? Has that like sort of had an effect on other people around?
Well, I would say, it's twofold. I can't take whole credit for it, but seeing that you can create your own micro enterprise and change the face of your farm has definitely, I believe, encouraged people, one, to have daughters, you know, And then secondly is to educate them, because if it weren't for my education, I wouldn't possibly be doing anything. I would have had 3 children by now. But secondly is that even with something so complex like grain, if you can do it, then you would be able to do it vegetables and fruits in a much easier manner, because the grain supply chain is very, very complex. It's highly competitive, and until unless you're not truly differentiated on by the merit of the product itself, it's very hard to sort of build a brand or to sell that product at a premium price.
Thank you so much, Anushka, for joining us today. It's been very refreshing to see a young woman farmer, and I really hope there's more of you.
Thank you so much, Sanjana, for inviting me. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you for tuning in to the Plate India podcast. See you next time.
If you like this video and want to know more about agriculture in India, then follow and subscribe to The Plate India.